Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Best Games Period. I'm your host, Jack Gardner, and with me this week is Kazuma Hashimoto. I believe I said that right?
Kazuma Hashimoto.
Kazuma.
So you got, Kazuma.
Kazuma.
Yes. So you got the last name down pat, and you just got the first name down pat.
Okay. Well, I tried.
And you succeeded, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, you are a returning guest on the show. People might remember you from our Resident Evil 4 episode of The Best Games Period. So welcome back. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And so fun fact, or maybe less fun fact, depending on your point of view. You actually recorded this episode with me already, and due to technical difficulties, the entire thing was lost. But you have been game enough to actually come back and re-record this entire hour-plus long conversation with me. And I really deeply appreciate that, and I feel like that's something our listeners should know as well, just because that's really swell of you.
Oh, no, it's really no problem. The only thing I'm, really upset about is the fact that our conversation got lost, because I think the first time around, it will definitely be better than us coming to revisit it. I just have this, feeling that that's going to be the case, and I'm going to be like, oh, damn, I really wish we could have talked about that one thing we talked about in the first version of the podcast.
Yeah, we'll be kicking ourselves for weeks after the fact, but there's also the possibility that this could be even better than the first one, since we've practiced it.
Yes,
Yeah?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay.
For people who might not have listened to our Resident Evil 4 episode, which I encourage everyone to go do, who are you? What do you do? What are you doing here?
Well, recently I've joined RPG Site and Nova Crystallis. For those who don't know what those websites are, RPG Site is a gaming review site and news site, and Nova Crystallis is the biggest Final Fantasy fan site, and I report news and I translate from Japanese to English, and I also do game reviews.
Yeah, and at one time you were also a UI designer, right?
Yeah, I've kind of left that behind me. I don't like the crunch. I'm already prematurely graying, and I don't want to, have that happen faster than it already is.
Well, I'm glad you found a less crunchy job. I think that's the first time I've ever described work as crunchy, but it actually worked this time.
Yeah, it works perfectly well.
Well, I suggested that we do Catherine for this Best Games Period because the remake, re-release, revamped version, whatever they're calling it, is going to be coming out relatively soon. I don't really remember the exact release date. Catherine Full Body? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's called Catherine Full Body, and it's a re-release of Catherine with a new character and extra scenes regarding that character. And I honestly, off the top of my head, I can't remember when it's supposed to come out, other than it's going to be coming out this year.
Yeah. So I figured it's probably good to get ahead of the curve for once and kind of maybe talk about Catherine and what it is, and it's kind of something that's difficult to talk about because I believe that when Catherine came out, released in 2011, people were ill-equipped to talk about it. And I feel like we're in a better position now than we've ever been before to kind of actually address the content of Catherine and kind of have an interesting and nuanced discussion of it rather than what we had in 2011, which for a lot of reviews boiled down to, it has a great story and it's a good puzzle game.
And it's an Atlas game, yeah.
And I feel like there are more interesting things to be said about Catherine and more lessons we can take away from it. That's the kind of conversation I want the Best Games Period to have. Especially given the last time we talked about Catherine, you and I, we have good some good thoughts on this game.
Oh, absolutely. I think as far as criticism has come regarding game journalism and reviewing, it's become a lot more critical. Definitely because people are more educated and more aware about certain social issues and different types of lifestyles. Things just aren't sort of fixating on the previous tropes and storylines of the past, and the scene as a whole has become more diverse. So more people are willing to offer up their experiences as kind of like a springboard as to, hey, this could be potentially like transphobic or racist or homophobic regardless of the developer.
Yeah, and it's important for us to recognize that criticism is different than this game needs to burn in a fire.
Yeah, the thing is, a lot of people mistake criticism for that, and unfortunately, the only way this medium is going to grow and for people to legitimately see it as an art form is to provide valid criticism for it. And I feel like a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that because people have a lot of personal feelings attached to video games, and like that's totally fine. Like,
yeah.
Media touches our lives in a multitude of different ways, and that's totally valid and completely acceptable. But it's also important and healthy to step back and realize that the media you're consuming is absolutely not perfect, and in order for it to be something that everyone can enjoy or to even be elevated and become better than it already is, there needs to be criticism presented in order for this medium to grow. Not just one game, but like all games as a whole. Because I'm not saying like, oh, you can only criticize like X, Y, and Z, and you can't criticize, I don't know, like A and B because they're perfect examples or whatever. Like, no, like, again, this boils down to some, I guess, controversial discussions of people wanting video games to be viewed as art. And if people do want video games to be viewed as art, then they need to understand that criticism has to happen as it does with any other valid art form.
Yeah, and I think that there's also a misunderstanding of what critics do, like professional critics. Because there's kind of the ambiguous meaning of critics, meaning people who are nitpicking stuff, and it's just kind of nitpicking for nitpicking's sake, as opposed to criticism, which is not saying that, oh, this thing is good, or oh, this thing is bad. Criticism is parsing meaning and kind of figuring out what a thing is saying and what it means in different social and political contexts, which all art has. So if we're treating something as art, then we need to address those things.
Oh, absolutely. And in relation to that, I also feel that game reviewers as a whole, unfortunately, like, and I've just joined this scene, like, I haven't even been in it for like 6 months. Before this, I've only worked in like corporate America and done like UI design and shit. So I guess me saying this is gonna sound kind of like flimsy, but I feel like game reviewers as a whole need to kind of step up in that regard, because a lot of criticism is pretty base, and they're not fully exploring like certain aspects of games and providing like valid criticism regarding some things. Like, this will definitely come up later on, like during as we talk about Catherine, especially because there are a lot of controversial topics in this game that people kind of like brushed over in the past.
Oh yeah.
And things people are kind of brushing over now, which is really unfortunate. But again, that'll be addressed later.
Yeah, and I think that there is a part of me that agrees with that, with what you just said, and there's a part of me that also thinks that a lot of it has to do with what the audience of games is ready for. Because we're kind of on the
cusp.
The cusp. We're on the cusp. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good phrasing of it. We're kind of in this like awkward intermediate stage, and I kind of thought that awkward stage was like 4 years ago when, or maybe even 6 years ago, when all the conversations of, oh, are video games art were happening, and like that was a legitimate question that people were asking. Now we're in this weird stage where, okay, video games are art, well, what does that mean? And a lot of people have no idea what that means. And I think a lot of that has to do with people just not learning about art in school or being taught what art is. This is going way off topic, I'm really sorry.
No, it's fine.
But I think that a lot of people struggle with critique and reading critique and understanding it as not condemnation, but as, hey, this thing has problems, and by recognizing those problems, we can all collectively be better and enrich ourselves, and also maybe create better things in the future.
Oh, absolutely. And only when I was in a creative environment was I ever subjected to this sort of attitude.
Hmm.
So I guess that's why like my feelings about this are very different, and I would really suggest that anyone who wants to look into like being a reviewer or understand this process a little more, or even as a reviewer themselves expand their breadth, I would just say talk to an artist or even try to sit in during a critique if they're like in college or something like that, just for like an art studio, so they can really understand like the fundamentals of critiquing and to expose themselves to critique rather than the condemnation you spoke of before, because on the internet you have a lot of people that just sort of like condemn something wholly and completely without any valid form of critique, and people see that, emulate that behavior, and that's where it gets really lost in the noise.
Yeah, there's a lot of hysteria around it, and there's a lot of like weird, maybe mysticism involved, and I don't use that
Mm-hmm.
to mean like magic, but like in a sense that people act like certain views or ways of parsing information are crazy. And
Mm-hmm.
when you see just snippets of those views and don't understand where they come from, they can seem like hyperbolic or weird or
Mm-hmm.
strange. And I feel like once you actually have maybe consumed some literary or media theory, like go out and read something by like Roland Barthes or something. That's just a name off the top of my head. He's the person who wrote Death of the Author, which is a famous piece of literary critique that has wide-ranging applications outside of just books. That will inform your view and help you better understand art and its place in our lives and the kinds of meaning and value we can kind of get out of that.
This turned into a TED talk, didn't it?
It really did, and I think that's important though, because when we're talking about Catherine, we're talking about a lot of things that aren't just Catherine.
Exactly.
That can be kind of difficult to explain, which I think is probably why I started off on this whole tangent, is because it helps to have proper framework and context for, I think, what we're going to be talking about for this episode. So,
Yeah, I feel like this episode's more about like criticism and critique of certain social aspects behind this medium that are otherwise overlooked due to Western viewpoints, as opposed to here are the game mechanics, here's the soundtrack, here's what it looks like, is this awesome, and how has it influenced the gaming industry? Because Catherine is fairly complex in its
yeah.
origins and in its story and the presentation.
And I think that explaining or critiquing the problems that it brings up is also fairly complex, which is, again, plays into the entire uh, tangent we just had, or
Yeah,
opening we just had.
I think our first podcast was almost like 3 hours long. Like, it
Yeah,
was really long.
yeah. Oh my goodness. Let's stop mentioning that because I'm still upset we lost that entire thing.
No.
Uh, but so we should probably talk about what Catherine is. Like what is the basic premise of Catherine and the gameplay mechanics. And I don't feel like we'll probably spend a ton of time talking about the gameplay element of Catherine. I could be wrong. Maybe we'll get into a whole thing, but we should probably establish those basic parameters.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Do you want to do it, or should I?
Sure. I'll give a basic overview. So Catherine's about this. Despite being called Catherine, it's actually about a man named Vincent Brooks, who's this 32-year-old. I believe he's a freelancer.
Yeah, he's a contractor.
Yeah,
I think he works in IT or something like that.
yeah, for maybe a phone company, if I remember correctly. It doesn't really matter what he does. Like, you just need to know that he's kind of a bum, and he hangs out with his friends and gets drunk all the time, and he has a girlfriend who is named Catherine McBride. But that's Catherine with a K and not Catherine with a C, which is how the game is spelled. And Catherine McBride kind of wants him to commit to a relationship with her, and Vincent is kind of a non-committal type person. And so there's kind of that tension established right off the bat. And then things start getting weird when Vincent meets Catherine with a C, who is kind of this really flirty and forward individual, and he ends up cheating on his girlfriend with Catherine with a C. And then he starts having weird dreams where he falls into this world and everyone's a sheep person, and he has to climb a tower of blocks with sliding block puzzles. And that's kind of the main gameplay of Catherine, are these dream sequences, these surreal sequences where he has to climb a block tower, and the puzzle elements are actually really great.
Oh yeah, people have been still playing this game for years. It came out in 2011, and it has a very active community just because the puzzle aspect of the game is incredible. Like, as a puzzler, it's definitely one of the best out there. Hands down. The different mechanics involved, the speed, the finesse. It's really amazing to watch people play Captain that are exceptional at it, because it's... Wow, I was really bad at it when I first played it, so props to anyone who can do this in a competitive environment, which will be happening, because I think they're actually introducing a competitive mode in Catherine Full Body.
Oh, really?
So that'll
okay.
be, yeah, that'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, so there's kind of this intriguing setup. Like, you could do a lot of things with, this kind of dynamic, because a lot of the dream sequences have extended meaning about kind of what's going on in Vincent's life and in his brain space, but then you start learning that the dreams have more reality than just being dreams. Different people are sharing the dreams with Vincent and also climbing this tower, and it becomes kind of this, I guess, reflection of masculinity.
Well, so the tower is actually representative of the path to adulthood and accepting responsibility, not so much masculinity, because all of the bosses in the tower are some sort of fear Vincent has regarding commitment, because to Japanese people, he's a 32-year-old man who's not fully hired, he doesn't have a promotion, so he's a deadbeat. Like, he really let his parents down. Like, I'm 27 and I'm unmarried and I've basically let my family down. Like, I'm considered an old man. Like, everyone can be calling me uncle at this point. So for Vincent at 32, that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
So in a developer interview, I actually read this. Like, I refreshed a bit before we did this again.
Oh, sweet.
That's what the tower is supposed to represent. It's supposed to represent Vincent getting to the top and accepting responsibility and becoming an adult. Because becoming an adult in Japan is very different from the, I suppose, the very masculine way it's viewed, especially for men in America, such as, like, having sex, having kids, that kind of thing. Like, it's not so much completely dependent on your sexuality as it's dependent on, can you care for your family, can you have kids, and how much money you're making.
Okay.
Like, that is what adulthood is.
Yeah. I didn't mean that the tower specifically represents masculinity, but rather the wider theme of the game kind of becomes about not just Vincent, but at least this is how I interpret it from my flawed worldview or incomplete worldview, but about masculinity in general. Like, despite the game being called Catherine and ostensibly being about Vincent and Catherine, there's a whole host of other characters around that you begin seeing enter this dream space, and a lot of the game is more so about their masculine struggles, either with commitment or relationships, and again, that could tie back into the path to adulthood. But I mean, like, Orlando, for example, is one of Vincent's close friends, and he's married, or was married?
He was married, yeah.
Did they get divorced, or were they separated?
Yeah, they got divorced.
Okay.
No, they got divorced.
Okay.
Well, Orlando's character, he's very much the guy who is very pessimistic about relationships, because his ex-wife, I think she cheated on him. So he's very much of the idea that, like, well, women can't be trusted, you know? Like, in the end, like, you're gonna end up alone, you'll end up unhappy like me, so he has that sort of attitude around it. And while his character is really deplorable and, like, super sexist, like, the dialogue he shares with Vincent is very, very real. So while I don't like his character, he's actually like my favorite character in the game.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because I feel like a lot of people walked away from Catherine liking the characters, which I think that's part of what gets me about Catherine is that I think the game portrays a lot of these characters in a positive light, but they actually do and say some pretty nasty stuff, and they're never really called out for it either by the game in context or by the people around them even when there's like someone who's repeatedly the butt of jokes and kind of mean-spirited jokes, no one ever really says, hey, that's really not cool. And I feel like reading reviews from 2011, a lot of people just didn't pick up on a lot of that mean-spiritedness in Catherine.
I feel like a lot of this is an oversight again because of where game journalism was at the time. Like when I read Catherine reviews, I don't see people talking like a whole lot about the story. I see them more focusing on the gameplay aspect. Like people really kind of glossed over it, and they were mostly impressed by the fact that a lot of the game was animated, like completely like animated in a majority of cutscenes.
Oh, the presentation's pretty wonderful, I think.
Yeah. Like, back then, people weren't really focusing on narratives in the way they do now. Like, when Catherine re-releases, like, it's gonna be dissected thoroughly this time around, definitely. Because you have different people that are part of the journalism scene and have a platform that are given a voice. But regarding context on the way, or as to why the characters act the way they do, so, like, I think we talked about this last time, was this cultural attitude of Mendokusai, and when someone gets bullied in Japan, Mendokusai.
Okay.
So, basically, it's like calling someone a pain in the ass, right? Like, don't be a killjoy. Yeah. So, when someone gets bullied, like, you just kind of go along with it, even if it's really terrible, because you don't want to be seen as a pain in the ass or a killjoy. So you get kind of used to these really mean-spirited jokes. And that's the thing with bullying in Japan, and there's, like, a huge, huge problem with this, and, like, a lot of people in Japan know it, but no one kind of really wants to talk about it. It's that, that kind of thing. It's very Japanese. And that's why, like, when these characters kind of say or do questionable things, no one really says anything too scalding, because that's just not in the nature of the way we are as a people, even among each other, unless if we're really drunk, or I guess if it's a bunch of salarymen that are going out drinking with their coworkers, because when you're drunk you can say anything and people will let it fly. Like, a really extreme example is you go out drinking with your coworkers, right? Mm-hmm. And even if you have female coworkers with you, if you're like another guy, like, you can talk about like, oh man, like, did you see the rack on that girl in accounting? Oh yeah, it's huge. And that's fine because you're drunk, so you can't be held accountable for the things you say because you're not really yourself. Like,
interesting. Weird.
Yeah. Like, I learned a lot of this from my dad. His business partners when he was growing up were Japanese. When I was growing up. Not when he was growing up, wow. And for the record, I am Japanese, so anyone who wants to say, oh, well, whatever, but they should have known that, my name is Kazuma, whatever. But he would tell me about this, how he would come back, like, and he's like, oh yeah, like, I was out with the business partners, they were drinking, and you can't really, like, argue with them or tell them anything, because when they're drunk, like, you can't say anything because it's totally acceptable, because they're just getting it out. They're just getting all of their feelings out, and they can't be held accountable for it. And that's just kind of this social attitude that's remained heavily prevalent in Japan as a whole.
Well, and so that's something that makes me wonder about the writing in Catherine and how mindful the writing is of the characters. Like, I don't know if the writers and the game itself is aware that these characters are not good people, and I don't. That's something I struggled with throughout my entire time playing Catherine. Like, I don't know if how aware the game is.
I'd say, again, I have, like, very conflicting view on this too. We talked about this last time, but their presence in the dreamscape alone is to indicate that these men are not as good as they make themselves out to be, especially because men who go into this dreamscape are usually cheating or aren't very good people or are tempted into infidelity, that kind of thing. So we already know that their character is not great. Like, they're not good people when it comes to this sort of value. Even Johnny, who I guess is like the most, I'd say he's the most likable or most average of the bunch. He's the, I wanted to marry my, like, childhood crush, and I inherited my business from my dad, and I'm a pretty quiet guy, even though I smoke 30 packs of cigarettes a day, like, whatever, you know? Like, he's like, the most average, normal character in that game when it comes to, like, tropes and shit. But the underlying, like, vibe I got was that all of these people weren't good, and I never thought any of them were good people to begin with, just because of the things they were saying and the way they were behaving, because even as a kid, it registered to me that these people were behaving like a lot of the adults I knew when I was a child, and I was exposed to a lot of things that aged me, well beyond my years, as my friends like to joke. Like, for example, Orlando's dialogue with Vincent about his ex-wife. Like, my parents were divorced. So a lot of what he had to say was, like, very, like, oh, yeah, like, of course he feels that way because, and I'm not meaning to unpack here, but, like, my mom cheated on my dad, too. So a lot of feelings he had about women and in relationships were very similar to that of my father's.
Okay.
So, regarding all that context, like, I listen to the dialogue from these men, and I look at it, and it rings very similar to the way a lot of men in my life behaved, like, growing up, or as I became an adult.
Yeah.
And it's very flawed and very realistic outside of the really weird supernatural elements in the game.
Which we'll
and
get
I feel
to.
like, yeah, and I feel like the only, and I said this before, the only, like, reasonable character in this entire fucking game is Erica.
Yep.
Like, she's the only one who's not lying or saying horrible things about people, and she's legitimately the only voice of reason in that entire game.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so just to go back to what I was saying, and part of my confusion is if the game recognizes that these characters are flawed, and I know that they're supposed to be flawed at the beginning, there are multiple endings to Catherine, and we'll kind of get to what happens in those endings, but the game never seems... I guess I don't see a whole lot of growth in the characters at all by the end, and they seem to be rewarded for their bad behavior. When the game ends, to me, it doesn't seem like any of the characters have actually changed at all. They're just... I don't know. Like even if you go for, like, the bad behavior route, you still end up king of hell.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the demographic, which we also talked about before.
Yeah.
And the fact that the demographic for this game is going... Well, it was literally marketed towards young Japanese men who were in relationships but not yet fully committed, or just like the middle-aged Japanese man, you know?
Yeah.
So you have these men playing this game, and this is who the game is marketed to first and foremost. Like, there were even commercials in Japan before this game came out where they would ask couples questions about their relationship on the street, like, have you ever cheated in a relationship, and things like that. Or, yeah, and, like, you have, like, this girl looking at her boyfriend, like, is he gonna raise his hand? Like, is he gonna do it? And he's like, oh shit. And that would be the commercial. Like, it was very good marketing for the game regarding that. And, basically setting the game up for its narrative about infidelity and relationships and the complex relationship between men and women as a whole. But as a result, you also have developers who need to make sure they get money and this game sells well, so you want to make sure the endings are all pretty favorable regarding whatever ending you get, and tailor it towards that specific audience, which is your straight, cisgendered Japanese man. So even if you get, like, the ending where you're just shitty to everybody, and you look at Catherine's nudes, and you're unabashedly cheating on other Catherine, you become the king of hell.
Like, the only ending of the game that actually made sense to me from, like, a thematic standpoint is if you, like, are... It's really hard to get, I think.
It's the neutral one, right? Where he's like... Well, no, that's the one I got the first time.
No, it's the bad neutral ending, where Catherine's just like, yeah, you suck, I'm leaving. And
no,
then...
I actually got that one my first time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And Vincent's like, well, I guess I'm gonna be alone. And he, like, kind of settles with his loneliness or, like, the fact that he's gonna be single.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, everyone's like, well, Vincent, you fucked up. And he's like, yeah, whatever, you know? Like, that's the ending I got the first time because I answered all of those questions truthfully. Yeah. So, like, that ending, I feel, yeah, that is definitely, like, the worst ending you could get in the game because in the end, Vincent will probably not get married. He'll never advance in his career as a result. He's continually irresponsible, but maybe that's even a good ending for some men who don't want to feel as though they have to be pressured to marry in order to fit a social standard in Japan. So, like you said, I wouldn't say any of the endings are particularly bad.
No,
From a Japanese standpoint, the best ending, the good ending is the one where he gets married because he's an adult now and life's good and he learned from this crisis he had, I guess.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think that Vincent actually learns anything throughout the course of the game. Like, his main takeaway towards the end, like so I guess we should get into kind of the supernatural spoilery elements of Catherine, and that's basically around halfway to 2/3 of the way through the game, you find out that the bar that they've been going to is actually run by this demon-type character who controls the dream, and Catherine with a C is actually a succubus. Vincent, upon learning this, is like, oh, well, then me cheating on her doesn't count, because she was an illusion. And then he tries to use that as an excuse to Catherine with a K, with no real proof. He makes a deal with the demon who runs the bar, and if he wins the tower game, the demon at the bar will make Catherine with a C appear, so he can prove to everyone that she's real but also an illusion. And that's his plan, and it's like the worst plan you could come up with.
It's basically a way to kind of assure that Vincent will be seen as a victim at the end, like, poor him for being deceived.
Yeah.
Which, like, this game uses again. Like, oh, poor X because Y was deceiving him for not telling him the thing, you know? Yeah. And I think this is where I guess our discussion kind of comes to, like, the center of the whole reason we're having this at all, and that's because Full Body's coming out, and it's easy to, I guess, make the assumption that the character is going to be trans. And
they have released some hints about that, yeah.
Yeah, they haven't confirmed it, but it's pretty easy to assume that this character's gonna be trans. And this is where our major critique of the series comes into play, definitely, because Catherine has always had a trans character in it, and that's Erica, but the treatment of Erica is really transphobic. Like, it's hard because Erica is a great character, and I think Erica as a trans woman is a great portrayal of a trans woman in media. And unfortunately, her character and the way people treat her is inherently transphobic due to the country that this game comes from.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, even if you don't know anything about, like, Japanese culture around trans people, I feel like if you are playing the game and viewing it with that lens on, or just paying attention to how the characters treat Erica and the things people say to her, the four bros, the main cast of men constantly make snide comments about Erica and treat her terribly and make fun of one of the guys who doesn't know she's trans because he's interested in her. Even in the best ending in the game that you get, these characters continue making fun of one of the characters for having a romantic relationship with Erica at one point, and he's clearly super uncomfortable. If you're looking at the game from Erica's perspective, everything sucks. Everything sucks.
Yeah, especially with what I told you last time, just about the whole thing about like the passing and everything, the way they talk about her behind her back. Because so Vincent, Orlando, and Johnny
And
have
Toby.
no, well, Toby didn't know Erica
Oh,
until
right.
recently.
Yep.
So Vincent, Orlando, and Johnny grew up with Erica and knew Erica in high school. And Erica disappeared, came back, completely transitioned, and they treat her nicely to her face, but behind her back they make comments, like a disrespectful friend would make behind your back if you were doing something or lived a lifestyle they didn't approve of.
Yeah.
And while I don't agree with this treatment, I think having it in the game, and this is going to be really controversial to people, is beneficial because it shows you the way that these people are treated, and if you feel like you identify with the way these men are treating this woman, then you probably need to reevaluate yourself if this was something you would do. Like, the way they talk about her is incredibly negative. It's incredibly transphobic, and it's uncomfortable. But it shows, again, that these men aren't, like, good people. But it's so, like, Catherine's so hard to talk about regarding this.
But see, that's the problem, and something I was struggling with is that I think the game portrays them as, like, they might be screw-ups, but they are fundamentally good-hearted. And I think that's the way the game wants people to perceive them. And I think that if you look at a lot of the reviews, none of them even really mention this aspect of the game, that Erica being trans. And if you look at like the discussions online, for the most part, there are a lot of people who just didn't even see what we're talking about in the game at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there is, and it comes back to me, my struggle while playing the game. I guess because it makes a difference to me if the game is aware that it's doing these things, or if it is just doing these things unintentionally and kind of bumbling around into this issue and royally screwing it up. Because I hear what you're saying. There is value in portraying kind of a toxic relationship that some trans people, or a lot of trans people actually, encounter in their lives, but I don't know if the game's intentionally trying to do that or not.
With Atlas, I'd say never. Like, especially Atlas recently. Like, the thing is, Atlas tries to, or has recently tried to, make itself seem like they write really progressive narratives. And to some people that might ring true, but for the most part, a lot of it's really shallow, and I feel like they inadvertently address these things and never really follow through. Because I'd say like the last time they were truly progressive was with Persona 2.
Okay.
Because that's where you actually had a bisexual main character.
Okay.
And that's a big deal, because being LGBT plus is hugely frowned upon in Japan. Like, you don't get told to your face to kill yourself, but you get told in other ways that are just as damaging.
Yeah.
So
I think last time you mentioned that there are only very specific areas where you can exist openly LGBT
yeah, and that's literally red light districts. Yeah, that's literally only red light districts. Unless if you're a celebrity, people don't want to associate with you, people don't want to respect you, and you get treated very poorly. Because it's a deviation from the social norm, and conformity is highly valued in society.
Okay. Interesting.
So this is also why a lot of people who are celebrities don't want to come out, or people would be happy in friendship marriages, and just kind of fulfilling the expectation of needing to be married to someone of the opposite sex and having a kid with them, while still living their life as a closeted lesbian, gay, bisexual person, because they will not have that social pressure, because this will affect every part of your life, including getting promotions. Like Vincent not being married, that's probably why he hasn't had a promotion. Because if you're not married, you're not seen as responsible, so how can someone trust you to do your job if you're not responsible? Like, it's literally all of this. Like, all of this is so heavily steeped in Japanese social conformity, social norms, and the way society views you. And this is why Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and like you bringing this perspective to Catherine, I think is really valuable, especially to an audience who maybe has never considered things from the Japanese perspective or just is uneducated about it. Like a lot of the things you have brought up in this episode, I didn't know about. It helps inform kind of how you perceive these different things, because there is that perception that Atlas makes these very socially progressive games with these, unique characters, and the idea that they are actually not that well realized in their games, I think is something that would surprise a lot of people in the West.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, especially in the West, because people think Persona and all this is like super niche. Like, these are huge selling titles in Japan. Like, these are AAAs, and you cannot expect proper representation from AAA games, like, because that's at the forefront of media. And usually, no one wants to talk about the things they've done wrong, or maybe stray from social norms in portrayals. Like, you'll see in Persona 5 most recently, there's homophobic characters in that game, and that's acceptable, like, in media. Like, people are not going to be upset by this. And this will continue to be the case until social reform happens, basically. But as it stands, when Atlas tries to be progressive, again, it's done, like, really, really shallowly, and in ways that it kind of just checks off, like, a box, and it moves on from it. Like, they always try to discuss about, we'll use an example in Persona 5, like, Anne, her character is half Japanese, she's blonde hair, blue-eyed, and people really sexualize her body and fetishize her because she is a half Japanese woman who has blonde hair and blue eyes. She's very exotic and foreign to them. And the game tries to kind of address that she's not treated like other Japanese people and is even excluded from Japanese society because she's half Japanese. Yet people want to look like her, but not, like, be that. But it does it really briefly and then moves on to something else. Same with a lot of, like, other character tropes or character arcs in the Persona series.
So it's like referencing these minority characters, but not really doing anything with them or exploring the issue.
Yeah, they don't explore it properly, they don't do it responsibly, because while they try to show that, hey, like, X, Y, and Z are outcasts of society, like, they're not really. Like, it's the most basic way you could do it. Like, kid dyed his hair blonde, so people bully him. Well, yeah, like, you shouldn't be dyeing your hair anyways when you're in high school. People are gonna think you're a fucking Bosuzoku, and of course they're gonna be mean to you. Like, and that's, a Bosuzoku is just like a gangster, basically. Like,
okay.
Yeah. Like, it's nothing big. Like,
and like, that's something that an American audience would have absolutely no idea about.
Yeah, like, and I'm not gonna fault anybody for not knowing it. Like,
no,
we don't like to talk about our society in English anyways.
But, like, it's I think maybe for like an American teenager playing Persona, the whole subplot of, or the idea of dyeing your hair makes you a social outcast and bullied. Mm-hmm. I don't know that a lot of people would pick up on the fact that in Japan, the connotations of that are very different.
Oh, yeah. Again, like, you want to try and look as much like everybody else as possible, behave like everybody else. Only in, like, Shinjuku and, like, really big cities do people really choose to express themselves, especially in fashion. But, like, it's only in these huge cities. So when it comes to that, like, people often go, oh, well, in Shinjuku or in Tokyo they do this. But that's not, like, all of Japan. Like, that's just a city. Like, you can't say the entire country has that one cultural attitude, because, I don't know, on Sundays you can go out and wear whatever you want and express your identity that way because it's only acceptable on that one day.
Wait, is that real? Is that a thing?
Yes, that's real. Yeah. So this is this is turning into the Japanese culture TED Talk, but you know, like, Lolita, yeah? Like, Lolita is a fashion movement started by women because they wanted to express themselves. Like, it's an anti-movement about, like, how Japanese men perceive and want Japanese women to be, and they kind of rallied against that and made that fashion movement.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm learning a lot.
Yeah. But this also has to do with Catherine in some way, as both Catherines, the way they're written and the way they're designed, fulfill two expectations placed on women in Japanese society. Catherine with a K, definitely more conservative, and the woman you want to marry, and Catherine with a C is the woman or girl you want to be with. She looks young, she looks under the age of, like, I don't know, like 23, so every guy wants to be with her and kind of be about her in that way. And this is probably something that a lot of people, I guess, would oversee as well. Or look over, you know?
Yeah.
I didn't mean oversee, look over. Because, when I played the game, like, I definitely have a type. So, for me it was Catherine with a K, so I was like, I would never cheat on her. I love her, look at her, she's perfect. I could take her to my mom would be so happy.
Yeah.
But, it definitely plays on this, well, what kind of woman do you like? Like, what kind of man are you in that way? Like, what are you more attracted to in terms of these two different types of women that potentially are available in Japanese society? And I feel like we got really off track here, because I was talking about how Atlas isn't progressive anymore, and now we got to clothes, and now we're back on to Catherine.
You touched a little bit on women with blonde hair being specifically more attractive because they're seen as exotic. And that probably, I assume, plays into Catherine's character design as well.
So, and this has to do with colorism in Asia. Now,
let's hop aboard the social issue train!
Wow, this is a lot. Okay. So Western beauty standards have been really prevalent in Asia.
Okay.
Mostly due to Western presence in Japan post-World War II. And Western standards have been idealized since then. Like, we already had a huge problem with colorism before. Like, the paler you are, the more privileged you are because you don't have to go out in the sun. Like, that's kind of where that stems from.
Yeah.
But regarding Western features being prized, that has to do with Western influence and Western superiority enforced in Asian countries. So it's white people.
Yeah. Colonialism.
Yeah, it's colonialism, yeah. Like, low-key colonialism.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, that's kind of it. I wouldn't say Catherine's design really plays into that, as more her attitude and the way she behaves. She's very cute. And she's very demure. Like, Catherine with a K, she's a bit bossy, you know? She's more of the nagging wife. And some guys are really not into that, because they don't want to have a nagging wife. They don't want to be with one with a strong personality. Because you're supposed to be demure.
Well, and it reminds you of all the responsibilities you have.
Exactly. Like, every time Catherine is talking to you, she's talking to you about, well, my mom says we should get married. Or, like, don't you have your promotion yet? Like, you should have had your promotion by now, Vincent. And she means well, but, you know, guys see her as like a nag. That kind of thing. And
now, I just remembered that this is an entire subplot in the game. Doesn't Catherine with a K at one point lie about being pregnant?
Yeah, because she's trying to force him into getting married because it's looking bad on her as well.
Holy moly, that's...
Yeah. Like,
that was a crazy thing I've totally forgot about.
Like, that's the game. Catherine, everyone sucks but Erica.
Oh boy.
Yeah, she lies about being pregnant, which is, like, I could totally, like, see that, because, like, he's holding her down, but she doesn't want to leave him, so, like, it's, you know, like, oh, I'm pregnant, you gotta marry me now, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it makes her seem, like, really dishonest and evil, so, ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. And just going back to Erica for a minute, I have a bunch of notes I made up when I was playing through the game. And one of them was, I'm not sure if it's lazy writing to set up a gotcha moment at the end of the game, or if it's transphobia when it comes to the stuff they're talking about when it comes to Erica. And I know we already kind of touched on this extensively, but that relates to a question. And again, it goes back to my being kind of unsure about the intentions of Catherine. How much of it is progressively showing, well, this is how life is, and how much of it is lazy writing that falls into tropes?
So, like, the state of what it means to be trans in Japan is really bad currently. There's no proper language for it, like, surrounding it, and the only way
what do you mean? Surgery... What do you mean by proper language?
Like, there's no word for it.
There's no word for being transgender.
No, other than the Romanji version of transgender. Like, you can call someone
crazy.
You can call someone like an Okama and everything, which is like a trans woman, right?
Uh-huh.
But that also kind of like almost has a derogatory like meaning to it.
Okay.
So like, it's a term that I don't use personally. Like, some people are okay with it, and that's fine. Like, whatever floats your boat, you know. But I tried to educate myself about a lot of these issues, especially because when you grow up in a Japanese household, your view of things is very colored, and my mom grew up saying a lot of slurs.
Oh, jeez.
So I had to scrub that from my language.
Gotcha.
So, there is no real language for it, and the only way to get surgery right now is to be diagnosed with gender identity disorder. So the trans identity is synonymous with mental illness.
And that probably doesn't go over too well with people.
No, I can absolutely guarantee that as a mentally ill and trans person. Yeah, that's something that gets you shunned by your family.
Yeah.
So, and involving that, like, the only way to change your name is to have your parents agree to allowing your name to be changed in your birth certificate, or by marrying someone who will agree to that as well.
So question, and I know you're talking about something else, but not getting too far off topic, but is that why Erica is dead named in the credits? Because she's not married, and maybe her parents didn't agree to her name change? Is that like is there a social reasoning behind that beyond just dead naming her for no reason?
That might be it. Like, I can't say. This game came out in 2011, and there is even less knowledge and information about that lifestyle in Japan at that time.
Right.
Like, than there is now. So that might be why they did it.
Because that was just something that struck me as very bizarre.
Because I remember, like, playing the game the first time, and I was young. Like, I was young in 2011.
Weren't we all?
Yeah, we were all young children then. And I remember seeing that name pop up in the credits, and I was like, who is that? Who else is this character? Like, who else is this person's voice? I don't know who that is. Huh. And eventually I got it, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah. And, I mean, from some aspect, yeah, I can see that, like, that's the reason why that's there, so maybe if people didn't get it, they'd understand it, or there's, like, a social reason behind it. But I can't really say for sure, but I can say that definitely plays into that, like, that whole scene and, like, what it is to be trans in Japan, so...
And to bring it back to that question I had in my notes, was like all of Erica's characterization kind of just building up to that reveal that either you find it in the credits or you find it in the true good ending. I don't really know. So I'm just wondering about your perspective.
So the first hint you get is Erica in the dreamscape.
Yep.
And that's Erica being worried because Erica has now entered a sexual relationship with Toby, and Toby's talking about wanting to have kids. And Erica's kind of freaked out about that. And I wouldn't say this is because Erica was designated male at birth. Because this expectation to have children is more about what it means to be, like, a valuable woman in society's eyes. And when you're transgender in Japan and you have your reassignment surgery, you get sterilized.
Oh boy.
So,
wow.
Yeah. So, her anxiety and fear over this, I think, is totally valid in that way. Like, I don't know if they meant it to be that way, but,
there's a way you can interpret that.
And that's the way I interpret it now. Like, as a kid, I was like, why is she here? Like, oh my god, is she cheating on Toby? Like, I didn't even think for a moment that it was because she's trans. I was like, holy fuck, she has to be cheating on Toby. What the hell's going on with all these people?
Okay.
But, like, as an adult, yeah, like, that's what I see in it now. is that this crippling fear of her not being able to feel as though she's enough of a woman and like to her peers, and this like really stressing her out because if her and Toby continue a relationship, he's gonna want to have kids.
Yeah, I guess I interpreted it just bluntly that the creators of Catherine still view her as fundamentally male or still falling into a masculine category. Mm-hmm. Because I guess I do that because they never portray any other women in the dreamscape.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that there are a few other takes online similar to how I interpreted it, but I guess how much of the benefit of the doubt are we going to give to the creators? And, you know, ultimately, does it matter? I know I opened this up by suggesting people read Roland Barthes, who wrote an essay about how it doesn't really matter what the creators intended, and it matters more about our personal interpretation. So, I guess does it matter if you can read it in a more positive light, like how you're interpreting it? Does it matter what the creators intended at all?
I think yes, because I believe that creators should be held accountable for their views and should be responsible for their creations, and Atlas seems to kind of stumble into these situations where they make like 5 steps forward regarding their like narratives and they take like 20 steps back in the same fucking game.
Yeah.
And you see this a lot in like a lot of their works that are closely linked to Persona or have any like a similar development team. Regarding Catherine, I think my interpretation of it is different because I thought a lot about it in that way, or I viewed it in that way, but I think it's more or less them sort of condemning Erica for not being a real woman, because that's honestly what it boils down to. Erica can't have children because she lacks the
organs.
Yeah, as a way society, Japanese society especially, will not accept her as a real woman.
Even adoption isn't even really an option for having kids.
So you can adopt, and when you do get married to someone of the opposite sex, like that's legal. But the adoption process has been really, really difficult up until last year. And no one wants to adopt because Japanese society dictates that you need someone that's of your blood or they're not really your family. Only if you're not someone who's concerned with that shit and is part of like the underground do you honestly not give a shit about blood relations.
I think that there might be some people listening to this who like go like, oh, that's really bizarre. You know, we do things different here in the West or in America, and I think that attitude of like being of the blood, I think that runs deeper than people in the West want to acknowledge as well.
Oh yeah, it's filial piety. Filial piety, like piety. I don't know. I speak English not a lot these days. Not as often as I used to.
Well, you live in Germany too, don't you?
Yeah, I live in Germany with my boyfriend, so I'm speaking German, Japanese, and English like all day. That's fun. And it's sort of like this expectation that when you have kids, they will care for you because, like, they're your blood, and like
they have to.
Yeah, they have to. Like, it's just the way it is. Like, no one questions it. The only reason I'm not about that is because, like, I'm very different in that regard, and my mom doesn't expect that of me because she would rather be, like, an independent woman living on her own for the rest of her life. Like, she left Japan for a reason. Yeah. So...
And I also think that there might be some people listening who don't understand why we've spent so much time talking about Japan. And I feel like all of this is really valuable framework for figuring out Catherine.
And critique.
Yes.
Because if you want to properly critique a piece of media, you need to understand where it comes from, the ideology behind it, who created it, and the views of the creator. And this is why I believe that creators should be held accountable for the things they make. Because no matter what you do, some piece of yourself is going to slip into something you write. And that's just the way it is. Like, it's just the unfortunate truth that Every project, I think it's the director, Catherine Hashino, every project he's been in on Atlas has some sort of fucking homophobia in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like, Persona 5, Persona 4, he was part of, in Persona 3, I think he was part of, like, all of those teams. And there's always some kind of homophobia in it. And this is why a lot of Atlas fans are very pessimistic regarding Full Body, because members of the LGBT plus community have only ever been treated like shit in all of the games he's been part of.
And again, like that, I think that sentiment that you're expressing would come as a big surprise to also a large portion of people who consider themselves fans of the Persona series, and maybe even because that it has characters in the LGBT community as part of the cast.
That's not true.
No?
Well, except for Persona 2. And this is a misconception people find a lot with Persona 4. That game is not about sexual identity or gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
It is about
and I haven't played any.
Identity.
I haven't played any Persona games, so
yeah. So there's
this is just my
big
perception.
Oh yeah, there's this big argument in the Western fandom, especially, that there are LGBT plus characters in Persona 4, and in the Japanese version, like, there are clearly no LGBT plus characters.
Really?
Part of the main cast, yeah. Like, it's not about that. Like, that's where people misinterpret a piece of media that they're familiar with, but unfamiliar with, like, regarding the culture.
Okay.
And I'm gonna fucking, like, blasted for this on social media. Like, anyone's gonna be like, this guy's full of shit. He's a homophobe, but he's a transphobe. But I'm just telling it the way it is because, no one wants to talk about it. Because,
this is very specifically your skill set. Like, you're a translator and you have insight into the Japanese mindset, I guess, the culture.
Yeah.
So you can understand these things.
And I'm also part of the LGBT plus community.
Right.
So, like, I have experience in this, and I have for, like, a lot of my life. And this is where people really rally behind Persona as being progressive because they misinterpret the themes. Or maybe the translations weren't too great. Like, a lot of people think the character of Kanji in Persona 4 is gay. He's not, and this is hugely misinterpreted by the sequence he has where you're in a bathhouse and you're fighting his shadow who acts like a very stereotypical, like, gay man.
Okay.
And he doesn't want to face this about himself, but in the end, like, you end up finding out that, like, the shadows are the perceptions people place upon you. And Kanji, he, like, has his hair bleached, and he seems really tough and everything, and tries to act like a bosuzoku and everything. But he really enjoys knitting, and his mom owns a yarn shop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people would make fun of him because he likes traditionally feminine hobbies. So this is why he, like, changed his appearance, because he was being bullied because he likes to knit, and so.
And people interpret that as him being part of the LGBT community?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Because they think that his character has an attraction to another male character who is later revealed to be a woman, like a young woman, and she has changed her social identity so she will be respected in the workplace, because women do not get respected in the workplace in Japan. And she's a young detective, so she presents as a man to get validation from her peers, because she knows she would be taken seriously as a woman, especially because she's so young. And, like, that's the sad truth of it in Japan, that women are treated really poorly and not respected in the workplace, and you have to work 3 times as hard as a guy in a similar job just to get any form of acknowledgement or validation. And later on, you know, she, like, when you up your social link with her, she tells you about, like, how happy she is that she can be herself around everybody. And even in the extended version, she expresses a lot of positivity about being able to present as a woman and not, like, feeling discriminated against by male peers and stuff. But people think this character is trans, and they push that this character is trans, that this is a trans man, and completely overlook the group of Japanese women represented by this character. And that's another argument in itself, like another debate.
And that's, I find it sad that the LGBTQ community in when it comes to games has to almost bend interpretations to find themselves in video games. Like that, to me, that people are trying to turn these characters into something that they're not. Either that is bad localization, or that speaks to a fundamental lack of representation in games.
I think it has to do with a lack of representation in games because as it stands, there's so little that we can represent ourselves with currently.
Right.
But I also feel a lot of it has to do with ignorance.
Yeah.
And it's not their fault that they feel this way or that they feel like they want to reclaim something that doesn't belong to them just so they can feel part of something. But the only thing that gets me a bit irritated is when people say that the series is progressive when it's not, when you have this homophobia and transphobia like inherently written into the narrative itself because of the society it comes from, and people saying this is like positive representation. And
I guess is that on the game for not making that clear, or is that on them as players for not having that background information?
Well, okay,
I guess this is kind of... Well, no, it relates to Catherine as well. So.
Yeah, it does, because a lot of the themes of Catherine, if you're not, like, aware of some social stigmas in Japan or, like, some expectations, you're not gonna completely understand some parts of the game. Like, while it is localization's job to make sure this is, like, fully explained to you in a way, like, you can't completely translate every Japanese sentiment or attitude in a game, like, 100%.
Right.
Like, that's impossible. Like, people have to do their own research.
And I guess I should also say that if you're just playing the game, it's okay to not pick up on all that stuff.
Absolutely.
But if you're a critic, I guess you have a duty to dive more into this stuff, to better understand it, to inform your criticism.
Exactly. Like, you should take the extra time to research and make sure your points are foolproof on a global scale and not just a Western scale. So, like, that... Yeah, that's my big thing. I actually wrote a feature about it. It'll be out soonish.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Because, like, I personally have no problem with people, like, seeking representation and shit. Like, that's something that never bothers me, but it's the misinterpretation of the culture behind it that irritates me. Because when I see things like the inherently transphobic treatment of Erica and people like kind of like letting it slide, or people saying, well, Atlas is great because they gave us this trans and gay character, like that's not true.
Yeah.
And in the end, Atlas is a AAA game developer in Japan, and their core demographic for their games are usually young men. That will definitely shift because more women are buying their games, and they will want to cater towards that market as well.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a company that cares more about the money they're going to get from you as opposed to a story they're going to tell.
Yeah.
And that's why I think Catherine, unfortunately, is deeply flawed in that way. That's why I think a lot of the representation in it is accidental.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like you said, it is very much oriented towards cis straight guys.
Yeah.
And guy problems, and that's not bad. It's just that it comes at the
expense of other people.
Right, of other groups of people, and that kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth, especially because there are only 3 women characters. I guess 5 if you include like the 2 old ladies who are in the bar sometimes. No, and there's one other lady, but they're not like
they're not fleshed out. Yeah.
They're very, very side characters. For the most part, Catherine to me felt very flat and one-dimensional stand-ins for specific issues rather than characters. And issues like fear of commitment and growing
infidelity.
Up. Yeah. And so rather than just standing on their own as characters, which I believe Erica does, and which is why she is a precious being that needs to be protected at all costs.
She's actually very well liked in the Japanese community, by the way.
Well, do you suppose that's why the character being added is probably going to be trans?
I'm not sure, actually. God, it's probably definitely going to be exploitive in some way.
Yeah.
But Erica was a hugely popular character in Japan. Like, people really liked her. I think she's still, like, one of the most cosplayed characters in the series, actually.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Like, she's very popular. A lot of people like her. There are a lot of positive opinions about Erica. Surprisingly, that really surprised me. But I won't know until I play Full Body, and I will, because, like, as flawed as Catherine is, like, I would suggest people kind of play it and make their own experience out of it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the heart of our entire podcast here, is that Catherine is a work of art, and that's why it's been worth spending an hour plus talking about it and, you know, discussing these various problems, because it is meaningful and artful, and there's I believe value in playing Catherine. I just think that when you play it, you should be able to see it for what it is and have kind of the proper framework for understanding it. And I feel like people, if you've listened to the podcast this far, you'll probably have a much better understanding of Catherine if you go back and replay it when Full Body comes out, or if you play it for the first time and for some reason you're listening to this spoiler-filled episode.
I'm sorry, we spoiled everything.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. Like, I feel like even though we've talked about it for a long time, there's still a lot of elements we probably haven't even touched on, really.
No, Catherine is such a deep game. It has to be one of Atlus's most mature games, definitely.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why I also really enjoy it, despite how flawed it is. I can go back to the narrative and look at it and feel like some of it is really relatable outside of the really weird supernatural elements. I mean, honestly, if Atlus made a game that was about interpersonal relationships between, like, 5 characters and cut all, like, the weird shit out, I feel like it'd be really great. Because they have this way of writing that can make dialogue be so believable.
Yeah. Yeah.
I even think, I think last time I mentioned that one of the conversations Orlando had was actually, like, based off of, like, one of the writer's actual experiences, like, regarding, like, one of his last marriages or something. Like there was something in that game that was just raw, like, really visceral.
Yeah, it does feel raw and real. Like, it feels like the characters are talking about real issues and things that they are struggling with. And I think that's part of why people liked it so much when it came out. And, like, I know a lot. You encountered a lot of reviews that focused on the gameplay. A lot of the reviews I read to kind of prepare for this podcast were talking about how it has one of the most mature stories they've ever experienced in a video game. And I think it comes down to that dialogue being very relatable if you are a cis guy. Like, there are real struggles there, and, like, distrust of women, and, like, feeling powerless or not wanting to fully become an adult and grow up. Those are all very relatable things to a lot of people.
Exactly. Like, even if you're a cis man or not, like, a lot of these concepts are very universal in the way that they can be applied to everyone's life.
Yeah.
Like, damn, like, a majority of people probably have been, like, cheated on and shit, you know? Like, everyone's afraid of being an adult, like, something responsibility. Like, what does the concept of an adult even mean? Everyone might feel inadequate or, like, with some sort of loss of identity at some point in their lives, and Catherine does address this in some way, shape, or form. Like,
yeah.
And I mean, when this game came out, like, there weren't a lot of really mature games coming out at the time either. Or these games that talk about these social issues. It was very much like, God, like God of War and Call of Duty. Like, Western gaming was really at the forefront during that time. So I remember finding it almost impossible to find any good fucking JRPGs around that time.
Yeah, and I think that for a lot of people, this was probably the first game that they had experienced that had a more mature take on relationships. And there is definitely value to that, and this game proves that. I just find it unfortunate that this game only feels like tackling the male perspective is the only interesting part, because I feel like I would love to know Catherine's, with a K, what her side of all of this is, because you never see what she is really doing. You only hear her talking on the phone and talking to Vincent. And she must have a lot of really interesting problems going on in her life too, because she made up having a pregnancy. Like that's a weird dramatic turn, and seeing kind of behind the scenes of her process of coming to that. I'd love to see Erica. Like what does she go home and do? Like what's her deal? And I feel like if the game had just expanded its interest a little bit and applied those kind of real feeling dialogues to all of the characters in the game, it would have been a richer and better experience for it.
Absolutely.
So I feel like we're maybe kind of wrapping up. What's your bottom line on Catherine?
So my bottom line on Catherine is, as a puzzler, it's really fantastic. Its narrative is rich, deeply flawed, and intrinsically written from a Japanese perspective. I know a lot of people are saying that this game is like really bad because of its treatment of Erica, but I really encourage people to go out and play it and make their own opinion on it and experience the narrative in itself. I wouldn't say it's the best game ever, but I would say that it serves its purpose as a piece of art in an evolving art form.
Okay.
Catherine did something that a lot of other games had yet to do at the time, and it's an incredibly dated piece of media because of how progressive social scenes have become, or openly progressive. I wouldn't say it's the best game ever, but if you like puzzlers, I'd check it out. Like, if you really enjoy puzzlers, check it out. You can skip all the cutscenes, whatever, Or if you want to experience this mature narrative we're talking about, then I'd suggest picking it up.
I agree with a lot of what you just said. Like, it's not... I would not consider it one of the best games, period, but it's still a game worth playing. It's still a story worth experiencing. And I think... honestly, like, part of criticism is just to open your eyes to different perspectives and understanding things in different ways and interesting ways. And I feel like if you go into Catherine with those open eyes, with trying to see what we've talked about when it comes to Erica, for example, or the different ways these characters fit into Japanese society, like how we've talked about so far, I think you will have a much richer experience and be better able to properly put all of these characters and events into a context that maybe makes Catherine, elevates it and makes it better for you, because you better understand these different elements you might not have considered before.
Exactly.
And I guess I'm... I don't know why, but I'm cautiously... Well, I'm on the fence about full-bodied, because...
Yeah, I'm
especially because it's called full-bodied. That makes me a bit nervous.
Yeah, I'm very cautious about it. I'm definitely going to play it because I want to make my own assumptions. Because I don't just want to jump the gun. Again, English is hard, guys. Jump the gun and just go into it without knowing what I'm talking about. So I'm definitely going to try it. And if I'm unhappy with it, I'm unhappy with it. And I'll definitely talk about it and critique it as a piece of media. But I won't just slam it before I have a chance to play it and experience it, because I was pleasantly surprised with Erica. And I was pleasantly surprised with a lot of the narrative. But to add on to what you said about experiences, for those of you listening and still listening, I would definitely suggest going out and broadening your own experience, reading about what other people have to say, how they feel, how they view things, and trying to involve yourself in other social circles to learn about how people feel or view other different types of media beyond like your own experience, because I feel like that's really important when coming to a piece of media and wanting to understand it and to also have a better understanding of yourself as a result too.
Yeah.
Because all this is like deeply introspective.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, and not to put you on the spot or anything, but are there any resources you would recommend to people who are interested in maybe understanding the Japanese perspective on these games?
Well, okay, so there is a website. They actually have an interview with a member of the Japanese LGBT plus community in English, and it's anime feminist, and they did a interview with a activist in Japan, and he talks about the LGBT plus scene in Japan a bit in depth, and talks about that social attitude that I referenced earlier. Regarding actual Japanese people critiquing Japanese media in English, that's really hard to find.
Okay.
Because a lot of people kind of stick to their own circles, and a lot of people won't be too open about this kind of critique. It's just, again, the way we are. Like, I'm definitely gonna get shit for talking about this the way I am.
Yeah, sorry about that, preemptively.
No, it's fine. It's whatever. Like, it has to be said. Like, I want the medium to grow. I want people to be understanding of social attitudes in Japan, to understand this society is far from perfect, and it's really, really regressive.
Oh, I had a point I was going to make earlier, and I totally forgot about it and didn't say anything. But now I remembered. I think there is a tendency in the West and America in particular to shrug off a lot of social issues in these JRPGs as, oh, it's just Japan being weird. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Me by 10 years because, like,
oh no, crunch time here.
Because I have been talking about this for like years at this point.
Yeah.
Because as a half Japanese person and a member of the LGBT plus community, like, life is not easy for me. And people have this idea that, oh, people in Japan just act this way and they're weird because of, like, I don't know, it's just the way they are.
Yeah, like that's really, just it.
Yeah, but in reality, they're a hyper-conservative community of people, and it's very patriarchal. So while Japanese society functions as a first world country, a lot of their views are very third world. Regarding things like mental health, it's very draconian, and LGBT rights are basically non-existent outside of like 5 provinces. So,
yeah. Oh, and
really,
sorry to interrupt, but you reminded me just there. When you said they sterilize trans people, you don't mean in the sense that the transition process can end up sterilizing a lot of trans people.
No, you actually have to agree to sterilization, or you cannot. Yeah, or you cannot.
Like
transition.
a specific procedure that sterilizes you.
Yes.
That's great. That's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not great at all. Again, there are a lot of really conservative attitudes that just have remained prevalent and no one really questions it. There are things changing slowly, but I can't really see any major changes happening without international pressure within maybe the next 10, 20 years, because unless if Japan gets like really openly shamed for something, then they're not really going to want to change their attitude, because it's this idea of saving face. Like, if they're kind of like, if people are like, ooh, Japan's like sterilizing trans people, oh, this is really fucked up, and they're confronted about it, they might be more inclined to change because they don't want to look bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's
that's
that kind of attitude.
That's part of why this stuff is valuable to talk about, especially because I'm sure 99% of the people who wind up listening to this and get to that part, this part of the episode, will be like, "Whoa, that is really messed up."
Oh,
and
yeah,
I had no idea.
Yeah, like I would definitely like do research about this if you want to learn more about it. I will have some articles up and I'll like tweet about it, whatever. But as it stands, yeah, like, Japan might seem weird to outsiders, and some of it doesn't even make a lot of sense to me because it's just the way it is.
Right.
But Japan, again, is like a ultra-conservative country. So, yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. Which is why it's important to at least talk about these things.
Oh, absolutely. Because to absolve serious social issues in Japanese media as it just being Japanese, that's really lazy.
And it
And
happens all
nothing's
the
gonna
time.
change that way. Yeah, like, well, there was this one scene in my Sword Art anime where this girl was, I don't know, getting sexually assaulted, but that's just Japan. No, that's fucking, consumption and capitalism at work in Japan as they tailor towards a cisgendered male audience. Like, that's the reason why this shit is in media.
Yeah.
Like, come on. Yeah, like, anyway.
Now that you're 10 years older.
Yeah, now that I'm, 37.
Catherine has this whole wealth, this whole wealth of problems, and it has deep flaws, but I think that there's a lot of value in examining these flaws for all of the reasons that I think made this podcast really interesting to record and then re-record this time. So you have that review on Anime
Feminist.
Yeah.
Yeah. They actually interview a lot of Japanese LGBT plus activists. I'm going to have a piece there. And they talk about things from a very critical lens, but also from a perspective that is keenly aware of Japanese society.
Okay.
So they also talk about these issues. They talk about like anime. People in the video game community don't really talk about Japanese media from a Japanese or international lens. They mostly focus on like Western lens and like I'm a Westerner and this is how I feel about Japanese media, so I can't really like recommend any of that because that's all super biased.
Yeah.
But regarding like educational articles regarding like the sterilization of trans people, you have like the Japan Times and everything that has like online resources and whatnot to better educate yourself about social issues in Japan especially. So I would suggest seeking those out, educating yourself, and replaying maybe some of your favorite Japanese pieces of media, or rewatching them, and having a better understanding of some of these issues and themes that are prevalent in almost every single piece of Japanese media.
Yeah, and I guess for me, as someone who lacks a lot of the context that you have, I think maybe the best way to go about searching for better context is whenever you do encounter a part in a piece of Japanese media that has you going, oh, that was really weird, I don't quite understand that. Spend some time looking into it.
Yeah, Google it, ask questions. If you have a resource, use it. And just try to educate yourself so you find a better state of understanding, and broadening your perspective like honestly never hurts.
Well, and because it's very rare that things are weird just for the sake of being weird.
Yeah.
And often if you look into it and an artist is doing something weird just for the sake of being weird, they will outright say that, or it will be part of their style. But often I think with Japanese media, there is a tendency to just, like we said, say, oh, that was weird, and then move on. And often there are underlying issues that are contributing to that weirdness and aren't actually weird. They're just bad or speaking to a larger problem. So let your curiosity free and actually look into stuff instead of just throwing up your hands and going, whatever. And that goes 100% more true if you are supposed to be critiquing this media. If that's your job, do better.
Exactly.
And I know I need to do better, so I'm not trying to absolve myself either.
Well, like, as writers, we're also artists, and being an artist means to never be content or complacent with where you are, and we're always in a perpetual state of learning. So I feel like that's very important to say as well. Like, all of us are going to be learning and growing and becoming different people.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, that's totally, like, acceptable, and that's great. Like, everyone should be learning and growing and evolving and changing. So never feel bad about not understanding or not knowing something, because you're never going to know anything 100%.
Right.
Like, even if you lived it, for example, like, my opinion on this will be different from maybe another Japanese person, because we're not a monolith. We're not going to share the same ideas and beliefs and views.
What?
So, what? What do you mean? Especially me, man. But yeah, like, always challenge yourself and always be ready to learn more and educate yourself on things you don't understand, because never be afraid to ask questions, or English. Question the way things are.
Unless it's English, because that really doesn't have any rhyme or reason to it. So
no, it's kind of the way it is. Just kind of get a feel for it.
Well, thank you very much, Kazuma.
Kazuma.
Am I mispronouncing the A part?
No, you're mispronouncing the U.
The U. I have a problem when it comes to vowels, and it might be my Midwestern accent.
That might be it.
Kazuma.
Kazuma. Yeah, you did it.
Okay, Kazuma.
Yes.
Okay, I need to practice and get it right.
It's a short O.
Okay, Kazuma.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Kazuma, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast and putting up with me and me mispronouncing your first name repeatedly.
Hey, at least you're trying, okay? Like, but no, thank you so much for having me. And when you want to have that talk about Yakuza, let me know.
Yeah,
I'd be down for it.
Would you also be down for maybe doing a Persona episode? Because I feel like there's probably a lot to unpack there as well.
Do you want to get me chased off of the internet? Like, I'm literally gonna get harassed over what I said about Persona 4.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, like it's fuck. Like, it had to be said, but like I need to lock my account again after this. Fuck.
Well, I was just gonna ask, where can people find you online? But maybe you don't want to.
Don't find me. No, you can find me at Justice Cat. Yeah, like, don't talk to me. No, no, you can find me at JusticeKazi _
Okay.
On Twitter. And honestly, if any of you have any questions, like, just hit me up. Like, I will answer them to the best of my ability. And if I can't, I'll try to send you somewhere where you can read about whatever you want to know about Japanese culture. Like, whatever. Like, fuck it, honestly. Or send me hate mail, I guess. Like, I don't give a shit.
Don't do that. Don't do that. If you're listening to this show, I expect better of you, audience.
Yeah, like, oh man, I'm gonna get put on full blast after this.
I really hope
not. Fuck, it happened like 2 days ago, so yeah, it's gonna happen again. It happens like once every few weeks, because, you know, people don't like feeling like they're wrong, and it's not about so much feeling wrong, it's just accepting that maybe you misunderstood something, and that's fine. Like,
we misunderstand things all the time.
Yeah, like, I didn't have all of this knowledge the moment I popped out of the womb. So, yeah. But no, like, seriously, for those that want to at me, feel free to. But also, if you can find other people who have similar experiences or maybe part of the Japanese community that speak English or will be willing to engage you in conversation, to talk to them too. Like, but yeah, I'm always open for conversation, always open to discussion. So again, you can find me on Twitter.
And your Twitter is JusticeKaz?
JusticeKazi and yeah, with an _.
Okay.
Yeah.
At the end or in the middle?
At the end.
Okay. Ooh, yeah. Fancy.
Yeah.
And where can people find the stuff that you write?
You can find me at RPG site. You can read my Assassin's Creed Origins review that, you know, got people angry at me too.
You just like making people angry.
I just like telling the truth, okay?
Oh, snap. Great rebuttal.
I do a lot of translations for the Yakuza series there primarily, so if you like Yakuza and you want to know about, I don't know, Yakuza Kiwami 2, you probably read my stuff there. And for Nova Crystallis, I mostly do reviews on games like Star Ocean and the City of Final Fantasy. So, yeah, you can find my stuff on those two websites.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And with that, I just want to say thank you one more time. It's been a pleasure having you on. And if you are interested in finding this podcast on Twitter, you can find us over at Best Games period. We also have a Patreon if you want to contribute $1 per month or something. Patreon.com/bestgames period. Helps us keep the lights on. You can find us on iTunes and SoundCloud. We appreciate reviews. That always helps. And you can also find this on GameInformer.com and Extra Life. And if you don't know what Extra Life is, it's this fantastic organization that raises money for sick and injured kids in hospitals across the United States and Canada. and basically people just get together, play games, and raise money for sick and injured kids. It's really great. And it can be any kind of game: video game, board game, tabletop RPG, whatever. So if you want to learn more about that, check it out over at extra-life.org, and you can also go over to the community site where you can find this very podcast, and that is community.extra-life.org, and there you can find a bunch of articles on video games, reviews, news, interviews, all that kind of good stuff, and also connect with people in your community to raise money, to help maybe get you started raising money for sick and injured kids. So it's pretty great. I encourage everyone to check that stuff out. And with that, do you have anything you want to close out the show with?
No, I don't. But thanks for listening for those who decided to stick through all the way. Like, I'm sure I'm definitely going to get some people mad, but I really appreciate you sitting through and listening to this whole podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone who took the time out of their day to listen to us talk about video games and culture and criticism and all that good stuff. This hasn't been a TED Talk, but if it was, it would be a good one. So, with that being said, we'll see you on the flippity dippity.